No nation is as ravaged by fires as Australia. It is the ever-present force that shapes our land and its people. Yet despite repeated disasters, this enemy remains largely unknown to us. Why do they happen?
The smell of smoke in every Australian city. Welcome to an Australian summer.
And how can we fight back? In this series, we'll meet the scientists.
Everything you can see from here burnt.
Trying to crack the mystery of Australian fires. We'll join the frontline forces, bringing an astounding array of technology to the fire zone. The battle rages as we go inside the Inferno. It's mid-January, and the bushfire season is at its peak.
So they're concerned about this coming back down?
No, it's just pushing this way.
At the headquarters of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, they're gearing up for another day of battle.
Just advising total fire events for tomorrow.
This is the war room, where up to 300 staff are trying to contain dozens, sometimes hundreds of skirmishes simultaneously. Today, the operation spans a high-intensity blaze in a pine plantation, a fast-moving grass fire that's cut the Brisbane-Sydney highway, and a blaze in a state forest heading for nearby farms. But today's biggest challenge will not be about saving lives or property. A potential disaster is brewing west of Sydney in the Wollamine National Park. 500,000 hectares of pristine wilderness. It's just 2 hours' drive from the centre of the city, but this is some of the most rugged country in Australia. A landscape of deep valleys, steep cliffs and canyons. Managing the vast park is Head Ranger David Crust.
In a way, we've ended up with this 500,000 hectare time capsule of a landscape that looks pretty well as it did before European arrival in Australia. And that's a really amazing thing, and that's something that's pretty unusual in this age.
Lightning strikes have started several major fires in the park, and they've been burning for months. Controlling the fires has required constant heli-bucketing missions from the air. And bulldozers pushing through containment lines on the ground, clearing the vegetation ahead of the fires to try and stop them spreading. But despite weeks of struggle, weather conditions in the next few days threaten to overwhelm all their efforts. Back at RFS headquarters, resident meteorologist Simon Lewis has been monitoring conditions, and the news is not good.
We're expecting an easterly surge in the wind, and what that might do is interact with the very hot temperatures that have built up there, and that's a pretty good recipe for enhanced fire danger in that area.
Winds can turn a small outbreak into a deadly inferno. All fires burn with a common pattern. The front is hottest, while the flanks move more slowly and burn less intensely. But it's wind that will determine the speed and direction fires travel. Just a 10 km/h increase in wind speed can make the difference between a fire travelling 5 kilometres in a day or 40. RFS Commissioner Shane Fitzsimmons knows this is going to be a tough few days.
There's been a huge investment in trying to get containment on the fires throughout the Wollamine. We are concerned about what is likely to happen over the next 24 hours, 48 hours.
So yeah, 36.
Easterly.
Yeah, wind sprint's up a bit there, 40 km.
The very real risk is under adverse fire weather conditions, those fires can breach the containment line. It's pretty tenuous at the moment and head in an easterly direction into more populated areas.
The forecast for increased winds means his troops in the field will face unpredictable and dangerous conditions.
It's very difficult, rugged country, difficult to access, and as we speak, there's a couple of hundred firefighters out doing a lot of very difficult, arduous work trying to get the upper hand on those fires before the bad weather sets in that part of New South Wales.
David Crust and his team have been assigned an urgent mission. The wind change means fires now threaten the jewel in the Wollemi Crown, some of the rarest trees on Earth. Prehistoric survivors from the age of the dinosaurs, the last remaining Wollemi pines were only discovered in this secret canyon 20 years ago.
The Wollemi pine, it was known from fossil records from the Jurassic period and was assumed to be extinct. And this is the only place in the world where Wollemi pines occur.
Less than 100 adult trees survive in the wild. It's incredible that these unique specimens are still with us. While they may be inaccessible to civilization, they're as vulnerable to fire as any tree in the park, so no effort will be spared to save them. Clearly visible by satellite, the main blaze in the park is burning across a vast front and has burnt through hundreds of square kilometres of bush. The wind change means it's now throwing ember attacks in the direction of the Wollemi pines. A 200-million-year-old wonder could be facing its last days on Earth. Aerial teams are scanning the bush, searching for any breakouts that might threaten the pines. A spot fire has been seen in dense forest.
There's a bit of black over there. Start looking for a place to land.
Inaccessible by foot and difficult to reach even by helicopter, they need to get a team on the ground to douse fires and prepare containment lines. Dropping through the canopy requires immense skill and patience.
5, 4, 3.
One clip of a branch by either rotor would risk the lives of all on board, but it's the only way to get the fire crews in.
Lane left and tails clear below. Now 15 off the lane left. Okay, hold. And lane's clear left. Tails clear. And do not kick tail left. Do not kick tail left. Okay, just nose. So nose left, tail right. And 15 centimetres off. Toes coming on. Toes are on.
Their mission is to reach the spot fire and extinguish it before it has a chance to grow.
That's the kind of thing that will burn for days and days, and then when the conditions are right, it'll all be off again, you know?
They carry in generators, pumps and equipment. In 40-degree heat, it's back-breaking work. For now, they've held off the immediate danger. But with the wind still threatening, it's time to call in the big guns. This beast is the Ericsson air crane. Since it first arrived here in 1998, the air crane has become the rock star of firefighting. It can suck up 9,000 litres, the equivalent of 5 fire trucks, in just 45 seconds. But like all rock stars, Elvis doesn't come cheap. It costs around $3 million each year to bring an air crane from the US or Europe, and more than $30,000 a day to perform. We can't afford air cranes everywhere, so the most cost-effective strategy remains as it has always been: spotting fires before they have the chance to spread. For decades, our first line of defence has been eagle-eyed volunteers.
Smoke sighting from Galston Tower of 350 degrees, 350, 80 degrees.
But today, that's changing. Social media is revolutionising the fight. Now, everyone is a potential fire spotter.
Social media has become a real tool for us because everyone has the ability to share intelligence. People these days are tweeting pictures very quickly. Photos are brilliant because with them sometimes you can get the geotagging out of it, so we can actually pop it on a map. Just by seeing that, we can see it is starting to build in momentum. It is going to cause some traffic delays, so we can share that even with crews on the way out there, or even provide some intelligence to the local incident management teams about, you know what, you may require an aircraft or you won't require an aircraft.
But some fires are stealthy, undetectable from the ground or even the air. Smoke and haze can obscure the view. So these aerial surveillance patrols are using technology that's making the transition from the battlefield to the fireground.
One thing that we use the FLIR camera for is hot spotting. We can pick up those hot spots that aren't smoking, but on an extreme day or a windy day, they might flare up and send sparks across the line.
They're using a device called a forward-looking infrared camera, or FLIR. that can pinpoint heat sources.
With this camera, we can see what they can't necessarily see on the ground, and then we can relay that to the ground so that they can bump that up.
The water bombers are sent GPS directions to water sources like dams and rivers, then guided right to the flame source. But even with this sophisticated technology, we can't defeat the great enemy of firefighting, the winds. For farmer John Phillips, it's a tense afternoon, ever watchful of the changing weather. His property at Wedden Mountain, 300 kilometres west of Sydney, is under attack.
You know, big wind, probably looking at about 15 to 20 minutes to pack up and get out or try and stop it. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting time from now on. Move to Stockton, the safest paddocks I've got, which is not very safe, but anyway.
The water bombers are in action, but strong winds are making it difficult. It's no longer safe to send them into the air.
Force Fire Media 1, go ahead.
Negative with the bombers, unable to get them in. Strong winds at airstrip, over.
Fire's basically taking a run. It's broken containment lines, potentially heading towards properties. Is that a house that's engine up?
Main mob in fairly bare paddock. The other one's in stubble, there's 300 in there.
As night begins to fall, the surveillance chopper guiding the ground crews must retreat.
The only water source you've got here are the tanks.
The high-tech has gone home.
Tractful, useful.
Now they'll have to fight the old-fashioned way, with graders and foot soldiers on the ground. But will it be enough to save John Phillips' home and stock?
Flycom, the wind's coming up. If it gets across this road, we're not going to be able to hold it here.
As night falls at John Phillips' property at Wedden Mountain, the aerial support is grounded. No water bombers now, no eyes in the sky. Just the volunteer firefighters facing the fury of a blaze. They're rushing to do a backburn, a controlled fire that will leave a buffer between the homestead and the oncoming flames.
That's the main part of the fire in there. That's what we're trying to round up. That's why we're putting a backburn around it.
Despite the cooler evening temperatures, it's still a risky manoeuvre. Without the aerial intelligence, they're literally fighting in the dark.
Because any wind will start to spot out of there. The wind will take any incendiaries or any embers, and we'll take it over into that area over there, or take it over the road, and that goes into private property that's on the grasslands or stubble country. There's houses in there, there's properties all through here, it's all farming country. If it gets over into there and gets to this wind, it'll just keep going.
And sure enough, the fire has broken through containment lines and is heading towards the homestead. They'll need to move fast to stop the breakout.
Just cut the fence out. Yeah. You're going to get a hole in there and get some barrier paper around it?
Yeah, we got that.
This is night fighting as it used to be. Just a radio.
Where's the going on map now?
And paper maps.
Tell us what the fire activity is, over.
And a sense of barely contained panic. But all that might be about to change. Boeing is adapting its war drones for the Australian fire zone. This is the first time any of these battlefield robots have been tested by fire authorities in Australia. Portable, relatively inexpensive, but far from graceful. Drone technology could revolutionise firefighting by extending the battle into nighttime operations. These unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, are remotely controlled by a specialist ground team and are loaded with high-def and infrared cameras. Theoretically, they could stay aloft for as long as the crew can stay awake.
It's driving nicely.
So this is the main control centre here. Obviously these guys are getting the imagery down in real time. When we detect fire hotspots, we can actually put a little marker down on the map so that when the information is passed out to the fire commanders, they're seeing the map display in real time, they're seeing the location of the scan eagle, and they're seeing the location of the fire front during the night. So not only do we have the streaming video, but we have the ability to actually map the fire front, pass that data back as it changes over the course of the night.
The next generation of drones could patrol autonomously, covering the fire grounds in uninterrupted 20-hour patrols. As well as monitoring the fire front, they could detect new outbreaks and warn ground teams of danger. Peaceful use for a powerful weapon of war. It's the vital information that might have made tonight's fight at Weddin Mountain easier and safer. After 7 hours of courage and sweat, John Phillips still has a home and most of his property intact. Fortunately, the fire here will be just another report from a long, hot day and not a tragic headline. But every summer is likely to bring more near misses and worse for increasing numbers of Australians.
Everybody likes the natural amenity that's the Australian bush, and it's great, but if you live there for your lifetime, inevitably you will face a serious fire situation. Now, unfortunately, there's some people who are going to face it more than once.
Despite the risks, we continue to build in fire-prone areas. Some trust in science and technology to make their houses more survivable.
It's a balance you weigh up. If you want a view like this, if you want to live in a bushfire-prone area, you have to pay what it costs to protect your assets. Here is what we call the asset protection zone, and this is a clear area so that there's no combustible trees, shrubs, it'll be just grass. The windows are all 6mm toughened glass. The walls are rammed earth walls, made out of earth. Metal cladding, all the gaps have been sealed. We're using the pool as our static water supply in case of fire. It's all just non-combustible materials, and that's what makes it a flame zone house.
It's peace of mind that doesn't come cheap.
It's probably cost us over $200,000 additional, over and above what the house would have cost to build.
The rising costs in fire-zone suburbs are one of the consequences of Australia's great success as an immigrant nation. Today, we have some of the fastest growing cities in the developed world. Every year, we're adding 400,000 people to the population, equivalent to a city the size of Canberra. And as our cities expand, more and more people are living on the boundary between the city and the bush. This is called the urban interface, and more than 1 million Australian homes are now in the danger zone.
This is typical urban interface. You've got houses over this side of the road that back directly onto the bushy area you can see in the background.
For RFS officer Kane Lampkin, these are not the leafy suburbs of real estate brochures. They are a disaster waiting to happen.
You can see the bush there, it's coming right up to the road there. And that's pretty steep through there. So when the houses across this road here are going to certainly be getting embers and a lot of smoke.
Most homeowners in the interface have a false sense of security. But as our cities spread and our climate warms, more and more Australian homes are at risk.
That's the thing about bushfires, is they don't discriminate. They don't care who you are, where you're from, whether you think you're going to be affected by a bushfire or not. It's completely controlled by the weather.
Just how devastating will it be when a blaze strikes one of our major cities? Based on recent experience, the impact will be almost unimaginable. January 18, 2003, the height of a long, hot summer. Drought, severe winds and extreme temperatures have combined to produce the conditions for the perfect firestorm. And the nation's capital is right in its path.
Everything you can see from here burnt. Everything.
Rick McRae has spent a decade investigating this event, a fire like no other in history.
Over 250,000 hectares burnt in this fire event in total. Colleagues of mine who flew in reconnaissance helicopters during and after the event reported astonishing things going on. You've got this enormous storm overhead, the sky's gone black. Where it isn't black, it's blood red, and people are hearing the noise of a jet engine coming towards them. They're seeing trees flying overhead.
Yet it began innocuously enough, with a series of small fires in nearby bush ignited by lightning.
It's been building up for 10 days. Each day was progressively getting smokier. But on that final day, on the 18th, you can tell, it's getting sort of fairly serious now.
Sorry, no more cars up this direction.
It never occurred to me that, because we live in the capital, you know, you don't think, like when you see bushfires on TV, you see houses surrounded by bush. We're not.
The temperature hits 40 degrees and strong winds are blowing. People take the usual precautions.
The residents have been out watering down their lawns, and I'm suggesting to them they go inside and lock up while this fire front comes through.
But nothing prepares them for what is about to hit.
You're going to see about 30 metre high flame here. Right, guys, it's going to get bloody hot. We want to get out of here.
Driven by the winds, 4 separate fires have now converged to become one vast fire front.
All units on Newton Drive, it's going across into the pine forest.
In mid-afternoon, the day turns to night as the city's suburbs come under devastating attack.
Can't see 2 houses alight. Can't see 3 houses alight. Okay, evacuate mode, get in.
Caught off guard, the emergency services have lost control. And the residents are hopelessly ill-prepared.
Get in, mate. Quick stick.
490 people will be injured on this day, and 4 lives lost. $500 million in damage. Something extraordinary has happened here. A fire has laid waste to an entire suburb in minutes. Gary and Trish MacDonald were witnesses to an event that even a decade later is seared in their memory.
We're out here with a hose. We're just standing roughly the same place, and then this big swirling mass, that's where it came from.
Holy shit. I've never in my life seen anything like it.
I was out of here.
It's just this monster heading towards us.
What they were witnessing was something extraordinary, an event never previously proven to exist. A fire tornado.
We set to collect all the information that was out there, which was photographs, videos, meteorological information, satellite imagery, and after we gathered everything and processed it, it was pretty clear that there was a tornado.
A vast column of fire, cloud and debris 1,000 metres high tore through the suburbs, lifting from the ground at several points before continuing its lethal journey.
It travelled 35 kilometres, it lifted off from the ground in two occasions there, and it moved through a pine plantation, destroying lots of trees there. Then it hit the urban edge. Houses were destroyed, houses were burnt, houses were destroyed by the winds and burnt. Very messy.
Rick McRae's analysis has now been able to explain just how this extraordinary firestorm could create its own weather system.
All of a sudden, the cloud is dominating the events, and this plume has got a cloud in it, and the cloud is pulling the plume upwards. When it punches upwards strongly enough, it can form the thunderstorm in the plume. When you get a thunderstorm, a fire thunderstorm formed, it can do what any normal thunderstorm might do.
The fire had a life of its own, generating winds of 250 kilometres per hour. It was 500 metres wide at its base and travelling fast.
What we found in the landscape behind me is that a large area alight, and the heat released by that large area alight drives a very vigorous plume. That's able to produce the fire thunderstorm, and that in turn is able to produce the fire tornado. That series of steps will produce catastrophic outcomes.
What no one had imagined was that a fire of such magnitude can be measured around the globe. The storm that ripped through Canberra was an unprecedented event. It produced effects so large, it attracted the attention of US military scientists.
Several years ago, we were looking at our satellite data and we discovered mysterious layers in the upper atmosphere. The textbooks would have told you that if we were to see these particle layers in the stratosphere, volcanoes would have been the source. And we looked for a volcano that might have erupted days, weeks, or maybe even a month or so before, and we didn't see any volcanoes. What we found was forest fires.
This is the same cloud, a pyrocumulus nimbus that follows the detonation of a nuclear bomb. Like a thunderstorm on steroids.
Pyrocumulonimbus storms make their own weather. And what that means on the ground is ferocious winds, lightning, and a whole dynamic cycle caused by the firestorm.
Scientists previously thought only a volcanic eruption could be powerful enough to throw pollutants into the upper atmosphere. They were wrong.
Smoke particles went from the treetop, burning, right through this cloud into the lower stratosphere, or the upper atmosphere. That smoke plume can then drift around the world.
The Canberra fires didn't just circle the city. Their effects travelled around the world, influencing global weather patterns.
One of the benefits of the research is that I believe we can help fire researchers by showing them the tools from satellite data to monitor the conditions, the fires, and then the firestorms themselves from space.
Satellite imagery is used by firefighters to support mapping and emergency response. But their effectiveness is often limited by heavy cloud cover. However, the latest laser-based satellites called LiDAR may soon mean we can detect fires from space.
There is a LiDAR from space called Calypso. The LiDAR in space can actually send a light beam down through the atmosphere and detect these smoke plumes with high precision, high accuracy all over the world.
More research is needed before we can have an early warning signal for a fire tornado. But their destructive power is so great that the US government wants to know what causes them.
So today we're setting up a fire world demonstration just to demonstrate how a fire world can be generated.
Jason Forthhofer has been studying the origins of fire tornadoes since 2010. Now, he can readily recreate one in the lab. Here, he reverse engineers a tornado by starting with its smaller relative, a fire whirl.
The fires are each trying to draw in their own air, and what's happening is this middle fire is having a real hard time drawing air into it because of the surrounding fires that are competing for that air. And the only way that middle one can draw air is through these gaps right here. And because of the air coming in that direction and those gaps, the way we've oriented it, it causes that rotating motion. And then we see that the fire is stretching that rotating air. And that's what causes it to be this really tight little spiral that's spun up with pretty high velocities, actually.
From his experiments, we can see that the Canberra tornado needed a series of separate fires burning in close proximity. Acting together, they produced just the right conditions to create a monster.
In the real world, they can be anywhere from this small size up to the size of an actual, real full-blown tornado, up to maybe 1,000 meters in height, and wind speeds up to over 100 miles per hour.
Once created, we are powerless to stop them.
They've done some very destructive damage to firefighters, to structures like houses and cars, torn roofs off houses, the same kind of damage that you would see from a tornado.
Fire whirls like this one, filmed in the Northern Territory, are spectacular, eerie events. Unlike tornadoes, they remain anchored to the ground. And though they burn intensely, they have just a fraction of the destructive power of the storm that hit Canberra. The aftermath of that inferno is still being studied.
If you were sitting in this exact spot on the day after the fires went through, you wouldn't believe that it would be looking like this after 10 years. It would have been ash, charcoal. No green material would have been visible. But nonetheless, most of the plants still were alive, even though they didn't look it.
In a stroke of scientific luck, ecologist Michael Doherty had spent a decade closely studying the bush before it was hit by the fires.
Because these large fire events aren't very frequent, it's very rare that you get the opportunity to do any sampling after them. So I feel really privileged, and it's been a fantastic opportunity to have had my plots up here, because it's really critical to know what was here before the fires to work out the effect of the fires and what happens into the future.
For him, the fires weren't a disaster. They were a research bonanza, delivering a snapshot of the impact of fire on Australian vegetation.
Within 2 or 3 years after the fire, there was a fantastic coverage of vegetation, and it wasn't just that the species were coming back on the plots, but it was the same individuals coming back where they were re-sprouting. So you've got a remarkable resilience in these ecosystems to even high-intensity fire.
His research is challenging accepted wisdom about the regenerative power of the Australian bush. While it was recognised that many plants were resilient, no one had imagined it was possible that every single species would be able to re-establish itself.
Many people thought that it was such an intense fire, such a large event, that the ecosystems would be changed fundamentally, that they wouldn't be the same at all. But their ability to cope with fire has been honed over millennia. The natural environment itself is quite able to cope with these large, high-intensity fire events.
Nature's extraordinary ability to adapt to fires isn't limited only to plants. One of evolution's most peculiar adaptations can be found in a tiny beetle that one day may provide us with a perfect solution for detecting fires. These remarkable insects can sense fires from up to 80 kilometres away. While other creatures flee, they head in the opposite direction, towards the flames.
So we really do not know how exactly the Australian fire beetle detects a fire. But we are convinced that the fire beetle has many mechanisms to become aware of a fire even from larger distances of many kilometers.
Each summer, Professor Helmut Schmitz travels from Germany to join the beetle in its unique and lonely mating frenzy in the smouldering remnants of burnt-out bush.
As soon as the forest fire is burning, these beetles obviously came from all directions and go straight to the fire and invade the freshly burnt area immediately.
The beetle uses a combination of super-sensitive cues to detect fire, infrared sensors, highly acute hearing, and it can even smell the most minute quantities of burning wood. All to find the one place it will breed and hatch its young, a smoking fireground.
Such an area is a kind of paradise because all predators are kept away by the fire, and the Australian fire beetles has developed a lot of adaptations in order to use the freshly burned area for reproduction. So they use these few days on a freshly burned area, as long as there is some steaming and burning material and heat and smoke, to feed and to copulate as often as possible.
Researchers are now trying to recreate these biosensors, whose sensitivity vastly exceeds man-made devices.
It's our hope that one day we will be able to build a kind of artificial beetle. That means a little microdrone, maybe a little quadrocopter, for instance, which can go up several hundred meters and is also equipped with all this amazing sensing.
But these remain dreams for the firefighter of the future. For now, our best hope might be in rediscovering the skills of our ancient past. As our cities grow and our climate changes, the reality is that our fire services don't have the resources to save every home.
Fires are inevitable. They will always occur. Any thought about making continental Australia fireproof is a pipe dream. It will always be the case that on some part of the continent, during one summer or another, there's going to be an event of such magnitude that people will lose their houses, and if we're lucky, there won't be a loss of life.
Given this reality, prevention is our best weapon. Using fire to fight fire.
If the current weather pattern is anything to go by, we might have another tough season coming up. So
in the cooler months of the year, fire crews are starting flames, not fighting them. On the outskirts of Sydney, Fire Captain Jamie Carter is preparing a hazard reduction. Intentionally burning the edge of a city is a massive responsibility.
The organisation for a hazard reduction like this is significant. Identifying what is the right area to be burning, where do we burn from, where do we cut it off. We then have to go to every individual property owner and get their permission to do the burn on their land, which can take a long time.
Today's plan has been years in the making. But there's a last-minute hitch.
G'day, Mark, are you there?
They've just heard news there might be a homeless man living in the burn area.
If he's in here somewhere and we don't know where he is, then it's a risk to his life, basically. This is not going to be a safe place to be for the next 36 hours. There'll be fire burning in here. It will burn reasonably intensely in here. There will be nowhere for him to escape it.
With the weather conditions deteriorating, hundreds of crew must stand down until it's finally confirmed the drifter is safe. They've found his campsite, but there's no sign of him. But back at base, they've received word the man is accounted for. Finally, the long-planned burn can go ahead. Hazard reductions are a controversial response to fire management. Many consider the benefits don't justify the risks. But for now, they're our best defence.
Any hazard reduction brings with it risks. Whenever you're burning bush, there's embers being thrown into the air. They can land in people's gutters, they can land in people's backyards. I think everybody just has to understand that even though this is perceived as a safe activity because it's controlled and there's lots of resources, if the fire escapes the containment lines or if it blows embers, you get a sudden wind change that's not forecast, which often happens, things can still go wrong.
The aim of the burn is to create a buffer from homes by burning into the bush by up to 100 metres. After this, the forest further back can be cleared. This is done with an incendiary drop from the air, essentially little fire bombs that will start low-intensity burns. Ping-pong-like balls containing potassium permanganate are mixed with glycol, like the antifreeze in your car. And within a few seconds, chemistry takes care of the rest.
Being able to do these hazard reductions in these areas right up to the properties gives them maximum protection. It gives them, for at least 3, 4, 5 years, the ability to sit back and say, well, a fire might come, but it's not going to come as intensely as it would as if that burn had not been done. Wow, that's going really well now.
But hazard reductions are not the panacea for all our problems. We simply don't have the resources to burn at anything near the scale that's needed to make us all safe.
I think every brigade is keen to do as much hazard reduction work as we can. The logistics of doing it, the window of opportunity you get to do it, the administrative processes around getting it approved, it's a complex process. It can take 2 to 3 years to get a burn approved. The realities of getting it done makes it hard to do it on a really massive scale.
Fire has always been part of the Australian story, but it hasn't always been our enemy. For tens of thousands of years, Australia's Indigenous cultures used fire to shape their country.
See here, all these little patches of green grass, they've all been hit by the flame. They're going to wilt very quickly now.
Aboriginal teacher Victor Stephenson believes that embracing ancient knowledge is the future of fire management.
When we burn in a circle like this, all the animals can smell it, and they've got the whole circle to get away. So when our country needs to be burnt, this is how we do it.
For 7 years now, he's been leading annual fire schools, teaching black and white Australians a new way of imagining fire.
We have a lot of knowledge from elders that tell about how fire was burnt and what are the reactions of fire. So when we do our burns, they're really cool fires. We walk people with the fire.
It couldn't be more different to the high-tech hazard reduction burns. And firefighters usually start the course expecting the worst.
We come out all prepared for a fairly intense burn, and it's been quite a lesson learned on how to burn in a high fuel area and keep it a very low intense fire, and it's working well, and it's been a big learning curve, and it's been a pleasure to work with these fellas.
In years of demonstrating his techniques all around Australia, Victor has not had a single fire break out of control.
People don't understand fire. We're faced with all this legislation that's being derived from the wrong fire management in this country. It's being derived around hot fires and fires that are dangerous, and they are the type of fires that, that don't really exist when we talk about traditional burning techniques.
And what we have now is a relaxed burn, you know, not freaking out. Yeah, very relaxed, not panicking.
Recently, he achieved a breakthrough. Approval for the first time to apply traditional burning in a national park. Recognition that ancient skills may have a role to play in managing our land in the future.
I don't think no one else knows how to treat this country other than us as Aboriginal people. You know, it's in the pores of our skin.
After centuries of often tragic struggle, we've come to accept that fire is an essential feature of the Australian summer. Science and technology may help us, but fire will never be defeated.